Democrats' favorability among Americans is at its lowest point in the history of CNN's polling.
We have a problem in the Democratic Party.
The Democrats more focused on bigger, broader ideas versus the day-to-day operations.
We as Democrats have to do a better job of connecting with those feelings.
I feel like I'm so overwhelmed.
This sense of exhaustion that people have.
What we're making is not covering what we're spending for anything else.
They're talking about fighting for their financial and economic survival.
If either party was working for a person like me, they'd be working on making things more affordable.
We understood their message and we don't want it. It's not the way you're delivering it, it's the actual product.
I'm Liz Smith, and I am here with Majority Democrats. You're probably seeing a lot of these post-election analyses. People like me weigh in and say what our opinions are.
Democrats don't know how people think anymore.
We decided to do things a little bit differently. We wanted to talk to the voters who decide these elections by, switching party, sitting home and not voting at all, and figuring out what they think, what they believe.
Listening is the biggest sign of respect, and active listening.
What they think Democrats are doing right, wrong.
Democrats are empathetic to a fault, and it stops them from getting things done.
Ditch the political talking points, ditch the legislative speak.
Don't put down the other side. Show them that you hear them.
This is the starting point for a better message.
What you just heard are excerpts from over 100 interviews that we did with voters who voted for Joe Biden in 2020 and then voted for Donald Trump in 2024, or voted for Joe Biden in 2020 and didn't vote at all in 2024. You're probably seeing a lot of these post-election analyses. You're seeing a lot of analysis of polls. You're seeing a lot of people like me weigh in and say what our opinions are. We decided to do things a little bit differently. We wanted to talk to the voters who decide these elections, decide them by, switching party, decide them by sitting home and not voting at all, and getting deep and figuring out what they think, what they believe, what they think Democrats are doing right, wrong, and what they want to see from us in the future. And for that conversation, there is no one better I could have brought in than the man, the myth, the legend, Larry Grisolano. So Larry, for those who don't know him, is one of the most storied media consultants in the Democratic Party. He and I first worked together in 2012 on Barack Obama's re-election campaign. Subsequently, we worked for Pete Buttigieg in his 2020 presidential race and Adam Schiff during his 2024 Senate race.
Some good ones.
Yeah, some really good ones. I personally describe Larry as human Xanax, and I mean that as a complete positive, and you'll see why as this goes on. I also thought Larry was the perfect person, that you were the perfect person to bring in for this, because I just remember over the years, especially recently, when we have had these conversations about how you talk with voters, how you talk about the economy, you are always the person in the room who's saying, lead with the pain people are feeling, lead with the actual feeling of it, right? Don't just talk about statistics, all of that, because that is what is motivating people. And until you can relate to people on that level, they won't listen to you about anything else. So Larry, thank you for being here.
Well, thanks for having me. Boy, when you listen to those clips that we heard at the top, it makes me want to start at the very beginning, the most fundamental thing, which is when you're running for office, you're asking voters to give you a privilege, a place of privilege in representing them in public office. And the very most fundamental thing you can do is show them respect. We have to find a way to acknowledge the problems that people have. And as we go through this discussion, and so many of the findings we're going to see in the research show how deeply these things affect people and how deep their feelings are about them. So we as Democrats have to do a better job of connecting with those feelings and acknowledging where people are at. And if we don't do that first, they're not really going to be interested in our resume or our white papers or other plans that we have on other issues. This is the starting point for a better message.
Yeah, and listening to them. One thing that we did here that's very different from other post-election studies is we did an ethnography. I think I first learned this term from you. And for people at home who definitely don't know what this term means, can you explain it to all of us in layman's terms?
There's a lot of different ways to go about opinion research. One is polling, people are familiar with. It's, polling gets beat up a lot lately. I'm not going to pile on to that because I think it's very valuable, especially at this moment when so many people are in their social media bubbles and only hearing from people who confirm their priors. I think polling is really good to give them some exposure to what the broader public thinks about. However, it's got a limitation, and that is you're only getting the answers to the questions that you ask. And usually, not even intentionally, but usually the way questions are asked, which questions we ask, how we interpret the answers that we're getting are in some ways also kind of influenced by our priors. So there's another way to go about things, which is focus groups. And theoretically, focus groups give people a chance to talk about what's on their mind and to explain to you what their answers mean. The limitation I think we run into with focus groups is that with a 2-hour discussion, 8 people, 20 questions, you're not really getting deeply into those kinds of, the answers to the kinds of questions that you're asking.
And you also find in focus groups, right, that people are a little bit nervous about saying the full truth in front of 7 of their friends, neighbors, colleagues, whatever, people they could run into on the street.
There's a group dynamic that sometimes makes it harder. People are sometimes more inhibited. So the alternative is the ethnography, where you go in very deeply with people, where you have long, extended conversations, usually over several days, sometimes in their own environs, and you ask them things that are much broader. What'd you do today? What kind of challenges did you have? What were your experiences? And people draw a picture of their lives, and then ultimately you can bring the conversation around to how those life experiences intersect with their feelings about politics and government.
Yeah, and I mean, the results of this one were truly fascinating. So let's dig right into it. First, we got to recognize the problem. So let's listen to a little more from these voters.
We know what we make and try not to live above our means, so to speak. Things that are out of our control is like the prices of things.
Unless you're working like a really, really good job, you pretty much need a roommate.
Mine is just to literally have enough to not worry anymore, not to go as far as having like a large savings or, some people want to be able to be successful, they have to be able to like retire with a whole bunch of money. And I don't think that I will ever actually get to that point. I just want to not stress about my bills. I would like to be able to take my kids to the movies whenever they want to, and I can't do that at all. So,
Larry, your thoughts?
What strikes me is how deeply emotional these people are in describing this problem. They're talking about fighting for their financial and economic survival. It's not, it would be nice to have a little bit more. It's, I'm living on the edge. And one of the things that came out in the research report that the researchers pulled from these interviews was this sense of exhaustion that people have. Mm-hmm. It's not just like they get through a period and then everything's okay. It's an ongoing struggle with no end in sight. And the important thing that I think we need to acknowledge as a party is this is a profound injustice. This ought to rattle your soul, that these people are out here working every day, doing everything right, working hard, sometimes 2 jobs, paying their bills, and they just can't make it. And I think as the Democratic Party, we ought to be the ones who stand up and say, this isn't right. We're not going to sleep at night until we find ways of addressing this injustice. And I think that that's the kind of urgency we need to give this the sort of emotional response that's on par with what people are experiencing.
Yeah, there are not a lot of Democratic politicians who speak to this well. One person who I think does is Marie Gluesenkamp Perez. And I wanted just to play some sound from her.
some of my colleagues would be like, well, how do we get these people to understand that the economy is great? I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, people are putting their groceries on a credit card. Like, there is not a spreadsheet on earth that is going to talk somebody out of their lived experience of not being able to afford rent, of working multiple jobs, of having to put stuff out of your grocery cart.
Larry, thoughts on that?
You know, she's just such a terrific voice. I'm kind of reminded, 20 years ago, John Edwards talked about the two Americas, right? And there was this one America where people were getting along pretty well, and they were making some money, and they were accumulating wealth, and they had opportunity in front of them. And there was another America in which people were losing farms that went bankrupt, or small businesses that were going under, or factories that were closing, and small towns that were drying up. And it was a different America. And as bleak as that sounds, 20 years later, we might look back and say that was the good old days, because it feels like the group that's got wealth is getting smaller and wealthier, and the group that's struggling to get by is larger and poorer. And nobody speaks to this better than Marie. And the point she made there that I thought was particularly important was, in Washington, you can't help but be surrounded by people who want to argue the case for the needs of the wealthy America. And they're not, sometimes those needs serve the common good. They're not, I'm not suggesting that they're evil, but you get isolated from the needs of the rest of the country. And we need people like Marie, who she couldn't forget about the needs of the people she represents if she tried. It's coursing through her veins, and she's just a really unique person in that way.
Yeah, and it's fascinating because back then, as you said, it felt like two sort of discrete groups. The economic exhaustion, fragility, pain people are feeling seems so much more widespread now than then. And I think the thought of the American dream now seems like more of a lie to people than it did back then. And just another thing I'd say on Marie is we have a problem in the Democratic Party. And look, I went to an Ivy League college. I have parents who have postdoctorate degrees, all of that stuff. But we do not have enough working people in Congress. We do not have enough people who aren't lawyers, who aren't lobbyists, who don't have, six-figure bank accounts. And I think having someone like Marie, who the National Party didn't support, right, and who owns an auto shop, that's the sort of Democrat we need to go out and recruit and find. Because if we do that, then more people, the people that we hear from in this ethnography, will find themselves in our party.
And I think she's a good role model.
Yeah.
Right? People, you don't have to have a log cabin story to address these issues. However, you can look at somebody like Marie, how she expresses herself, how she talks about these issues, and learn a lot about the sort of authentic experience of working class people.
Yeah. You know what? She's fucking normal.
They still think they have a messaging problem when it's not that they didn't put their message out right. It's just we understood their message and we don't want it. Well,
there's nobody better than Liz Smith to help us make sense of this sentiment in the electorate. Liz, how do we, in this kind of chaotic communications environment, how do we help our candidates speak more meaningfully and effectively?
Just be normal. Ditch the political talking points, ditch the legislative speak, and just talk like a normal person. And there's someone who I think really does a good job of that. And I want to read a tweet from him. It's Senator Ruben Gallego from Arizona. And he got some heat from this. And understand this, when you talk like a normal person, you're going to get some heat. You'll get some heat from like a small group in Washington, but voters will respect you. So Ruben, a few years ago, said when Latinx was a trend among Democratic politicians to use, including some we work for, he said, quote, "To be clear, my office is not allowed to use Latinx in official communications. When Latino politicos use the term, it is largely to appease white rich progressives who think that is the term we use. It is a vicious cycle of confirmation bias. And, you know, it reminds me of during the 2020 campaign when we were working for Pete and like younger staffers would send me tweets, things like that to approve, and would have like woman with like X in the place of A or E. And I'd be like, man, like no one talks like this. Like, what are we doing here? And if we're trying to reach people, we gotta talk to them the way they talk and not the way just like a certain subset of interest groups talk. Your thoughts? I know you have some.
There's a great through line between what Ruben's expressing and what we heard Marie say. They're kind of no bullshit people.
Yeah.
They put things directly, and they're not trying to figure out how to tiptoe around and use appeasing vocabulary, and they're speaking out of their life's experiences. And it's also not like these you're hearing from people who are talking about working class people as though they visited an alien civilization and were coming back to report back. They live these things.
Or Papua New Guinea. Yeah.
Yeah, they live these things, and they're talking to us about things that they've lived. And it really, I think, shows us kind of an effective way of communicating quite directly. One of the most compelling recommendations from the report is the idea of giving people grace, respecting people's differences. And we do have a clip here from somebody who says this as well as you'll ever hear.
I think the sports conversation is a good one, because I think there's a big difference between banning trans young people from extracurricular programs consistent with their gender identity and recognizing that there's room for nuance in this conversation. And I think the notion that we created this all on or all off mentality, that you had to be perfect on trans rights across the board, use exactly the right language, and unless you do that, you're a bigot. You're an enemy. And when you create a binary all on or all off option for people, you're going to have a lot of imperfect allies who are going to inevitably choose the all off option. We have been an exclusionary tent that is shedding imperfect allies, which is great. We're going to have a really, really miserable, self-righteous, morally pure club in the gulag we've all been sent off to.
She's so good. And a lot of people focus on the fact that she is trans, but I actually think she's one of the better messengers in the Democratic Party. And some of this comes from, and you tell me this, right? You also work for Obama. You also work for Pete. I think that when you come from this outsider perspective, and everyone has always been putting you on the outside or pigeonholing you this way, that you actually can give a bigger view and give more grace to people. Because you in your own life, Pete used to tell the story of the person in the grocery store who would come up and be like, "Hi, Pete, I saw your friend the other day," and it was his constituents' way of nudging toward the fact that he had, a gay partner. And I think that she's doing that in the same way that Barack Obama did with having a black president, with Pete did with being a gay public official, and now Sarah does with being a trans public official, of saying, it's gonna take some time and we need to give grace to people. And the fact that she, the first trans elected official, is giving a lot more grace to people than like all of us straight normal people, listening to her, vocalize the experience of being a trans person, which she says really smartly with the gay marriage debate, for instance. It took years and years and years. And with trans rights, it's like we went from Trans 101 to Trans 301 like overnight. And we need to do more education. We need to show compassion, of course, for the people, especially the kids, who are caught in the middle of this political crossfire. But we need to show some grace for the people who are not just there yet, who have some questions, and not just kick them out of the Democratic Party, say they're irredeemable, bigots, all of that. And I think that her language reminds me a lot of Pete's language in 2020. It reminds me a lot of Barack Obama's language in 2008. It's something we can all learn from, especially when the trans issue is being so weaponized by Republicans across the country.
I agree, Liz. I think one thing that when you talk about her language that really strikes me is this concept of imperfect allies. And it's just such a compelling way of putting things, because you talk about the imperfection, but they also can be useful as allies, and that's what giving grace is. It's overlooking that people aren't perfect and they bring faults to the table. I think that there's also, beyond her important perspective and this point she's trying to make, there's something even deeper in what she's saying, which is something that's thoroughly strategic. And by that, I mean, we're supposed to be the party of democracy. And the most fundamental thing in a democracy is that the majority rules. And her idea that you can't just exclude people and still be a majority party is profoundly pragmatic. And I think that helping us see ways of building coalitions and overlooking people's imperfections, not excluding them because of them, is a really, really important part of this conversation.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It reminds me, do you remember this focus group we did in Iowa in 2019 for Pete? And it was Bernie Trump voters, people who caucused for Bernie and went to Trump. And it went around the focus group, went around the circle. And it's so easy when you're sitting from afar to be like, oh, this person's going to think this person's going to think this thing. I remember I got to this guy, and like in the back of my head, I'm like, okay, I could see how this could be a Bernie Trump voter, like sort of looks like a Bubba, all of that. And they get to him and they're like, who are you leaning toward in the current presidential field? And he said, Pete Buttigieg. I was like, and comes around about, Pete being gay rights, all of this. And he said, you know what? My niece is trans and I don't necessarily understand it, but I don't want her to be bullied. I love her. She's one of God's children and we should protect her. And God damn it, like, I don't want politicians ganging up on her. And I think that there is, even for people like that who don't use the exact right language, there is a humanity we can appeal to.
Yes.
And we can appeal to that, which is don't bully these kids, but also don't demonize people who just like aren't quite there yet. And I think if we can find all of that, like we can definitely find a common ground that we are quite far from finding on issues like trans issues.
I think that one of the things that she doesn't say that is really important is she doesn't say we should sell out our base. She doesn't say we should compromise core values. What she does say is we need a coalition of people who are going to be imperfect on some things.
I believe strongly that I show people respect. I talk to them. I listen to them. Listening is the biggest sign of respect, and active listening, where you can repeat back what someone said to you. And you can even admit when you were wrong a little bit.
And there's actually a candidate who does this pretty well. Let's hear from him.
We lose sight sometimes of our own obligations, each of ours. All the quiet acts of courage that unfold around us every single day. Ordinary Americans who give something of themselves, not for personal gain, but for the enduring benefit of another. The courage of a single mom who's working 2 jobs to make sure her kid can go to college. The courage of a small business owner who's keeping folks on the payroll because he knows the family relies on it, even if it's not always the right thing to do for his bottom line. The courage of somebody who volunteers to help some kids who need help.
There is this interesting connection between what he's saying, this idea of just giving people respect, even if they're in a hard position, and lifting them up and saying, this is something to be honored. And I know Obama does things a little bit more eloquently than most people can, but you don't have to be Obama, I think, to be able to have that humanity that says, this is really something I admire, and show people they're valued.
Yeah, and it goes back to something I heard once from Marie Glusenkamp Perez. It always bothered her a little bit when she would go into a crowd, listen to a politician say, well, I'm so proud because I'm the first member of my family who went to college. And what it signaled to the people in the crowd who didn't go to college. Like, should they not be proud? Do they not matter? It also reminds me, let's go back to 2012. It reminds me of this quote from a Democratic consultant in 2012 on TV who said about Ann Romney, what does she know about work? She's never worked a day in her life.
Yeah.
Because she's a mom.
Yeah.
And I can tell you this. You know this, I worked my ass off in politics with you, all of that. I'm now a single mom of a 2-year-old. I can tell you this. I have never known work or true work until I became a mom. Like, no BS there. This is no spin. It is so hard every day waking up being like, am I doing everything right? Am I feeding them right? Am I reading them the right things? Are they watching this right screen time? Should they be watching screen time? All of this. And as Democrats, we need to respect that work, right? That in itself, like I work and have a kid, but like for a mom who just stays home and works, that is so freaking hard and all-consuming. And for someone who just stays home and takes care of a sick family member, that is so much harder than going in and clocking into a 9-to-5 job. And we need to respect that work too. So let's get into the next one. Watch this.
The Democrats are empathetic to a fault. They have never seen a minority group that they aren't willing to throw everything in for. And it stops them from getting things done because they're trying to run all over the place to solve generational racism and put everybody in a box of oppression. You're a woman, so you're oppressed. You're black, so you're oppressed. You're transgender, so you're oppressed. Instead of just talking about how we're all the same and how policy affects us all the same. It doesn't matter if, one person's black and one person's white. Yes, they may be experiencing racism, but they're also getting screwed by the economic policy. And we have a lot more in common than we don't have in common. And I think the Democrats need to start talking about that rather than the oppression Olympics.
Tough, but fair. And, Larry, we've worked in Democratic politics for a while. And we've all worked on those campaigns where you have the Black agenda, you have the Latino agenda, you've got the women's agenda. And the thing is, no one actually buys it, right? Because it's all sort of pandering stuff. Like, why does the Black agenda always sort of focus on criminal justice? The Latino agenda always focuses on immigration. The women's agenda always focuses on abortion. So like the identities that this identity politics is supposed to identify with doesn't work. And then everyone who isn't part of those groups is like, well, what about me? Where am I in this equation? And so it's like we've done two things at once. We've pandered to and alienated the people we're trying to attract, and on the other hand, we're told other people that they don't matter. A catch-22 in politics, and I'm curious for your thoughts on that as someone who's worked in many races across the country with many different demographics on how we handle this.
As I was listening to the clip and relates to what you're saying, I feel like we got to go back to, at the root of these things, are righteous causes, like things that we believe in and that we should not discard. We need to be better advocates on some of these things. However, what I kind of think the person who was speaking was saying was she feels like that happens to the exclusion of a unifying economic message that cuts across all the groups. And I think that this is where we can make the greatest improvement. Talking about those economic issues that people have a very emotional connection to, pardon me, as we've talked about so far. And I think that this is the place where we can really kind of attract more voters.
It's crazy, right? We've seen it. I know Bernie Sanders has been someone who has pre-2020, when I think we all deserve some amnesty for 2020. The things we did, said, adopted in 2020. But before, he was like, this is about class. It's not about racial groups. It's not about gender, all that stuff. I mean, of course, everything is always going to be, to some extent, about race, gender, sexuality, all of that. And you saw it with Trump, too, just being like, all of you guys are getting slogged. I think that was his term, right? And he didn't say Black people are getting slogged, Latino people, women, gays. It was just all of you are getting screwed by a system that's rigged, and I'm going to be the person that drains the swamp. And I think we do need to broaden it out, and people can smell when we're pandering. And then people who we're not pandering to are like, well, where the heck am I? You know, there's that whole debate about the DNC agenda, their platform, right? I mentioned every group, every women dozens of times, didn't mention men once. And what sort of message does that send? And I think Democrats have got to be the party of the people. We got to be the party of a broad-based coalition and understand that the struggles that a lot of us face, we face across racial lines, across, geographic lines, across gender, all of that. And I think that our maybe good faith efforts, I think it was rooted in good intentions, didn't work, and we got to try a different approach.
One thing I would say that's encouraging on this is I don't think that certainly our research here shows the Republicans aren't coming in and filling this void. Right. People don't think either side is speaking to their economic interests well. So the opportunity is there for us. People are eager for somebody to step up, and it should be the Democratic Party that chose this leadership.
Agree.
Well, we're getting toward the end. We've heard a lot of people's criticisms and misgivings about the party. And now we have a few clips from folks about things they'd like to see us do.
That they actually do things that they say they're going to do. They don't just say things and then not actually follow through with them.
That they seem to genuinely listen to you. They generally seem to care about what you're saying. They seem to respect and value your opinion, your ideas.
What voters are telling us, right, is that they don't need us to put out the biggest, boldest policies, the biggest promises. We don't need to be like Donald Trump saying, we'll build a wall and make Mexico pay for it. They just want to feel safe. They want to feel secure. They want to know their kids are going to good schools. They don't want puppies, rainbows, a free pony at their door when they wake up in the morning. And yet, I don't know, we're somehow still falling short on it. So I'm curious how we square that circle.
I kind of think this is one of the most encouraging pieces of all the research. They're not asking for the moon. I remember in that one of the earliest clips we played at the top, somebody said, the Democratic Party is always talking about what's ideal. And now you have all these other people saying, I just got to pay the rent. And so I think this really sets us up. We don't need to solve everything. We need to show progress for people. We need to give them just a little breathing room. And the sense that if they had a little more breathing room, it would make a huge difference ought to really help instruct how we propose solutions for people. And it's very encouraging. It's not an insurmountable bar.
Right. And we can't do that unless we meet them where they are, right? Unless we say, we feel your pain, as Bill Clinton said back in 1992, and really feel it, really understand that their healthcare bills, their utility bills, the mortgage, all of these things are making them feel like they're underwater. And until we feel that pain and can meet them where we are, I don't think we're going to be successful as a party.
Well said.
All right. Well, we lived through 2020. We lived through 2024. We just heard and watched, listened to all of this stuff. Where do we go from here?
You know, we have what I think the data tells us, and in some really kind of rich and personal ways, is we got a lot of work to do, and there's things that we can do better. I think finding ways to show respect to people, as we've talked about, to not give this impression of elitism that people feel put down by, is kind of table stakes. And I think I have no doubt that I think as people think that through and have sort of these very direct kind of testimonies from people as to how they've felt about Democrats in the past, I think that's a really helpful place to make a step forward. But the second thing that I think is probably more important to people is meeting them head on, knowing that this is the struggle, talking about that exhaustion that they feel trying to pay the bills, not being able to make ends meet, and there being no end to it. It just goes on and on. Having a real sense of that and being able to talk about that's good. And finally, I think that this has informed some of our policy solutions. What we talked about in the final section of we don't need to re-architect the whole world, but if we find a way to make things a little easier for people, they're going to feel heard and recognized, and their lives could be just that much easier.
And also what I hear is that people, like all of us, are complicated. Their politics are complicated, right? They're not just right down the center, right down the left, right down the right. And I think that for us to move forward as Democrats and to move forward in a way that can capture the majority, we've got to meet people where they are. We've got to take the best ideas from wherever they come from on the ideological spectrum. Yeah, sometimes like AOC and Bernie have got it right. Sometimes it's like Jared Golden or Joe Manchin, very different. Maybe it's a Joe Rogan who's got a really great rhetorical thing. Maybe it's a Jake Auchincloss in Massachusetts. Maybe it's a mayor like Aftab Pureval in Cincinnati or Daniel Lurie in San Francisco. And I think listening to all of these people speak, it's that no one wing of any party has all the answers. No one of us as the people behind the scenes has the answers. And if we are going to succeed as Democrats, become a majority party, we need to listen to people, meet them where they are, find the best ideas from wherever they come from, and show a little bit more empathy, understanding, and just continue to listen.
And we really did see some really encouraging people in the party who are talking about things in effective ways. Marie, Sarah, Ruben, like these are people who are helping us see the right direction.
And very different people. Very different people. The future of the Democratic Party is heterodox, it's interesting, and it depends on listening.
Well, it's been good talking to you. Liz, actually, I appreciate the little trips down memory lane, some of the old research projects for Pete and President Obama. Those were good times.
They were. Well, hopefully we can do this again.
We'll look forward to it.
Thanks, Larry.